The humans smelled the stench of burning flesh and death as their warships dropped out of hyperspace. These apex predators had come to hunt. Captain Andrew Johnson stood ramrod on the bridge of the HFS Retribution. The ship's sensors already showed a horrific sight, a massive Elysian fleet in orbit around the Gamelon homeworld, assault pods swarming down to the surface like angry hornets from a kicked nest. Plumes of smoke rose from the dying planet. Screams of agony and terror flooded the comms. The Gamelons, in their desperation, had begged their old human adversaries for aid against a threat they could not overcome alone, an existential threat to all biological life in the galaxy, the Elysians. Cybernetic marauders that slaughtered populations and fused survivors with metal and wires to become slaves in their ever-expanding machine legion. Now the humans, the wolves of the galaxy, had arrived to face this menace head-on. The Retribution and her battle group were all that stood between the Gamelons and extinction, between the Elysians and a key foothold in this sector. Captain Johnson gripped the arms of his command chair, knuckles white as he beheld the invasion already underway. They may already be too late, but by all the gods of war, his species would make the robotic bastards pay in blood and oil for every inch of ground, every life. "Battle stations!" Johnson barked. Alarm klaxons blared and the crew scrambled to their posts. There was no more time. The hunt was on. The Elysians were about to learn that when you back predators into a corner, they bite back. Humanity had come to remind the soulless machines why biological life had ruled the cosmos for billions of years before the first microchip ever blinked on. It was time to throw the wolves among the metal flock. "Red alert! All hands to battle stations!" Captain Johnson's voice boomed through the intercom. The bridge crew rushed to their posts, fingers flying over control panels as they prepared the ship's weapons and defenses. Suddenly a hail from the planet below cut through the chaotic bustle. "This is Prylar, leader of the Gamelon resistance. Captain Johnson, do you read me?" The voice was strained, exhausted. Johnson leaned forward in his chair. "I read you, Prylar. What's your situation?" "Dire. The Elysians have obliterated our fleet and breached our planetary defenses. They're flooding the surface with assimilation pods, turning our people into—" Prylar's words caught in his throat. "Into drones. Machines. Please, Captain, we need your help to evacuate the remaining civilians. It's our only hope." Johnson's jaw clenched. He had come to destroy the Elysian fleet, but he couldn't abandon innocents to a fate worse than death. He had to act fast. "Understood, Prylar. We'll get your people out. Transmit coordinates for the evacuation." He turned to his crew. "Change of plans. We're splitting the fleet. The Retribution and her escorts will engage the Elysians in orbit. Buy us time. I'll lead a strike team to the surface and extract the civilians." The crew hesitated only a moment before nodding crisp affirmatives. They trusted their captain with their lives. Johnson rose from his chair. "Lieutenant Kyles, you have the con. Give those metal bastards hell." "Aye, sir," Kyles saluted as Johnson strode off the bridge. In the hangar bay, Johnson and his hand-picked team suited up for combat. Grim determination etched every face as they checked weapons and boarded the drop pods. They knew the odds, knew many of them might not return, but they were the wolves of the void, and they would not let the robotic abominations consume Gamelon's people. "Drop in 30 seconds, the pod's computer announced. Johnson took a deep breath, steadying himself. Above them, the Retribution and her battle group surged forward to meet the Elysian fleet head-on. Lances of plasma crisscrossed the vacuum as the opposing forces clashed. The furious space battle filled the viewports, a kaleidoscope of destruction. "Drop pods away!" The pods plummeted from the ship's belly towards the ravaged world below. Johnson and his crew braced themselves, adrenaline pumping, as they hurtled through the war-torn skies. The hunt was on. The drop pods slammed into the cracked earth of the Gamelon homeworld. Dust and debris billowed around the impact sites as the hatches blasted open. Captain Johnson emerged from the settling cloud, pulse rifle in hand, his strike team fanning out behind him. The once proud alien city lay in ruins, buildings toppled and fires raging unchecked. A group of ragged Gamelon resistance fighters scurried from the rubble to greet the human soldiers. At their head strode Prylar, his green skin marred with soot and blood. "Captain Johnson, thank the gods you made it," Prylar said, clasping the human's armored forearm. "We must hurry, the bunkers are this way." Johnson nodded curtly and motioned for his team to follow Prylar's lead. They picked their way through the war-ravaged streets, eyes scanning for threats. It wasn't long before a pack of Elysian drones sprang from the shadows, energy weapons spitting deadly fire. The humans reacted with lightning reflexes, diving for cover and returning fire with disciplined bursts. Sergeant Hawkins, Johnson's second-in-command, dropped 2 drones with precise headshots. Private Mendez sent a third sprawling with a shot to the knee joint, then finished it off with a blast to the sparking cranial unit. Johnson himself charged a drone attempting to flank their position, smashing its metal skull with the butt of his rifle. The machine crumpled, twitching and leaking fluid. Prylar watched the humans dispatch the drones with a mix of awe and unease. "I have never seen such skill in battle," he remarked as they pressed on. "Your kind fights with a ferocity I did not expect, given our past differences." Johnson glanced at the Gamelon leader. "When the survival of all biological life is at stake, old quarrels seem petty. We'll fight and die beside you today, Prylar. The Elysians are a plague that must be purged." They reached the entrance to the underground bunkers, resistance fighters ushering terrified civilians out to the waiting transports. Johnson arrayed his team in a defensive perimeter, watching warily for the inevitable Elysian counterattack. "My people are in your debt, Captain," Prylar said as the evacuation proceeded. "Perhaps when this is over we can—" A shrill alarm from a nearby sensor drone cut him off. Johnson checked the readings and cursed under his breath. A massive force of Elysian attackers was converging on their position, a tide of metal and malice. Johnson keyed his comm. "All units prepare for heavy contact. Hold the line at all costs. We will not let these abominations take the civilians." He glanced to Prylar. "Get your people to the transports. We'll buy you as much time as we can." Prylar hesitated, then nodded solemnly. "Fight well, Captain, and thank you." As the Gamelon civilians streamed into the bunkers and the resistance fighters scrambled to load them onto ships, Johnson and his humans hunkered down to face the coming onslaught. The ground trembled with the approach of the Elysian horde, a sea of glinting metal limbs and glaring optics. The humans checked their weapons and steeled their nerves, ready to sell their lives dearly to protect the innocent. They were the last bastion, the thin line between life and the unending horror of the Elysian assimilation. Johnson raised his rifle to his shoulder, sighting down the barrel at the first ranks of the approaching drones. "Hold fast, wolves," he growled to his team. "Time to show these soulless bastards the fury of Earth." Plasma fire split the smoky air as the battle was joined, the fate of a world hanging in the balance. Johnson surveyed the approaching Elysian horde, his mind racing. The civilians were still loading onto the transports. They needed more time. Every second counted. He turned to Sergeant Hawkins. "Hawkins, you're in charge here. Hold this position. Nothing gets through to those ships, understood?" Hawkins nodded grimly. "We'll hold the line, sir. Give 'em hell." Johnson gathered a mix of human commandos and Gamelon resistance fighters, including Prylar himself. "We're going to hit their command center. If we can disrupt their neural network, it might buy us the time we need." Prylar hefted his plasma rifle. "A bold plan, Captain. Lead the way." The infiltration team moved swiftly through the war-torn streets, darting from cover to cover. Johnson took point, his augmented senses alert for any threat. They encountered scattered pockets of Elysian drones, dispatching them with ruthless efficiency. As they neared the command center, a towering spire of metal and pulsing conduits, the resistance intensified. Elysian warriors, heavily armored and bristling with advanced weaponry, poured from the structure to block their advance. Johnson and his team took cover behind the ruined shell of a Gamelon tank. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as the Elysians laid down suppressing fire. "We need to break through," Johnson shouted over the din of battle. He popped up and sent a volley of shots towards the Elysian line, dropping one of the warriors. Beside him, Prylar fired his rifle in controlled bursts. "Captain, I have an idea. If we can flank them from the right, we might be able to push through their defenses." Johnson nodded. "Good thinking. Take half the team and circle around. We'll draw their fire." As Prylar led his group in a flanking maneuver, Johnson and the remaining fighters redoubled their efforts. They leapfrogged from cover to cover, steadily advancing on the command center entrance. A Elysian warrior lunged at Johnson from behind a shattered wall, its razor-sharp blade slicing through the air. Johnson reacted instantly, blocking the strike with his rifle and delivering a devastating kick to the drone's midsection. The Elysian staggered back, sparking, and Johnson finished it off with a point-blank shot to the head. Prylar and his team struck the Elysian flank, catching the warriors off guard. The two-pronged assault broke the enemy line, and Johnson's infiltration team surged into the command center. Inside, they fought their way through the twisting corridors, following the pulsing conduits towards the central control room. Elysian warriors attacked from all sides, their movements precise and relentless. Johnson and Prylar found themselves back-to-back, fending off a group of elite drones. They moved as one, covering each other's blind spots and taking down the Elysians with a combination of skill and raw determination. As the last drone fell, sparking and twitching, Prylar glanced at Johnson with newfound respect. "You fight well for a human." Johnson allowed himself a grim smile. "You're not so bad yourself, Prylar." They reached the control room, a cavernous chamber dominated by a pulsing, otherworldly machine. Johnson immediately began planting explosive charges, while Prylar accessed a terminal and started hacking into the Elysian network. "I'm in," Prylar reported, his fingers flying over the alien interface, disrupting their communications and drone control systems. Johnson armed the last charge. "Charges set. Let's get out of here before—" A deep bone-rattling hum filled the air, and the room shook with the force of an impact. Johnson and Prylar exchanged a worried glance. "That sounded like—" "Her Elysian battleship," Prylar finished grimly. "It must have descended from orbit. We need to move now." They raced back through the command center, the structure shuddering around them as the battleship unleashed its firepower on the surface. Johnson could only hope that his team and the civilians had managed to evacuate before this new threat arrived. As they burst from the command center, they were greeted by a scene of utter devastation. The Elysian battleship loomed overhead, its weapons raining destruction upon the battered city. Johnson's heart sank as he saw the smoking wreckage of several transport ships, their hulls torn open by plasma fire. But there, rising from the rubble, was the battered but unbroken form of the Retribution. Johnson's ship was engaging the Elysian battleship, its guns blazing defiantly. And on the ground, Sergeant Hawkins and the remainder of Johnson's team were herding the last of the civilians into the remaining transports. Johnson keyed his comm. "Hawkins, status report." "Sir, we've got most of the civilians loaded up, but that battleship is tearing us apart. We need to evacuate immediately." Johnson looked to Prylar. "Go, get your people to safety. We'll hold off the Elysians as long as we can." Prylar clasped Johnson's arm. "Fight well, Captain. May your gods watch over you." As Prylar raced to join his people on the remaining transports, Johnson rallied his team for a final stand. They would buy the civilians the time they needed to escape, no matter the cost. The ground shook with the tread of Elysian warriors as Johnson and his soldiers took up positions among the rubble. The Retribution dueled with the battleship above, a David against a Goliath. Johnson raised his rifle, his eyes hard and determined. The wolves of Earth would not go quietly into the night. They would fight to their last breath, their last drop of blood. For the sake of all life in the galaxy, they would hold the line. Johnson gritted his teeth as he watched the Elysian battleship rain destruction upon the surface. The Gamilon transports were taking heavy fire, and time was running out. He made a split-second decision and hailed the Retribution. "Lieutenant Kyles, do you read me?" Johnson shouted over the comm link. "Loud and clear, sir," Kyles responded, his voice strained. I need you to focus all firepower on that battleship. Concentrate on its weak points. We have to give the transports a chance to escape." There was a moment of hesitation. "But, sir, that would leave the fleet vulnerable." "I know the risks, Lieutenant, but we have no choice. We can't let that ship destroy the evacuation. Give it everything you've got. That's an order." "Aye, sir, retribution out." Johnson turned to Pryler. "We need to blow the command center now. Your people are almost clear." Pryler nodded, his face grim. They raced to the central control room, dodging debris and sparking conduits. As they set the final charges, the building shook violently. Johnson looked out a shattered window and saw a sight that stole his breath. The Retribution and her remaining escorts were charging the Elysian battleship head-on, weapons blazing. Explosions blossomed across the enemy ship's hull as the human fleet poured fire into its weak points. Then, in a stunning display of self-sacrifice, several human ships broke formation and rammed the battleship, detonating their reactors on impact. The battleship lurched, massive holes torn in its structure, secondary explosions rippling through its frame. "Now!" Johnson yelled, hitting the detonator. The command center vanished in a blinding flash, the shockwave throwing Johnson and Pryler to the ground. Around them, the Elysian drones stuttered and collapsed, their neural network severed. Staggering outside, Johnson saw the last Gamelon transport lifting off, the survivors safely aboard. But the cost had been immense. The human fleet was in ruins, and the ground was littered with the bodies of fallen warriors, both human and Gamelon. Pryler helped Johnson to his feet. "You saved my people, Captain. We owe you everything." Johnson shook his head. "We did this together, Pryler. Your people fought bravely. I'm just sorry we couldn't save more." They limped back to the Retribution, now badly damaged herself. On the bridge, the surviving crew looked to Johnson with a mix of grief and grim determination. Johnson gazed out at the stars, Pryler at his side. "This war is far from over. The Elysians will be back, and we need to be ready." He turned to his crew. "Plot a course for the nearest friendly starbase. We need repairs and resupply." He looked to Pryler. "And then we keep fighting, for both our peoples and for every race in the galaxy threatened by the Elysians. This is only the beginning." The Retribution, battered but unbroken, the last beacon of hope, turned her bow to the void and leaped into warp, ready to face the challenges ahead. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.